Hello and welcome back to the waiting list with my very good friend. We're going to get closer and closer friends, Emmanuel Steels, who is a clinical psychologist, and I'm coming to him with lots of questions today. We're also, we're wearing the same clothes, so you can probably tell we're shooting straight after our introduction episode. And just before we do get started, again, thank you to the RTF for letting us use their building. Please get in contact with them, the Raw Theatrical Fund, that is.
Do you want to talk a bit about what they do now or at the end?
We'll do that at the end. We'll do that at the end. Oh, actually, no. So, yeah, the Raw Theatrical Fund is a charity we have kind of close family ties with, and they support crew, actors, people that work in the industry, mainly on stage and on TV and film, who are injured or can't work for a specific reason, and it supports them. So if someone's been injured on stage, for example, the charity supports them and will, I think, work alongside with like Equity, which is obviously the I forget the name of it, the guild. That work with actors and other industry professionals, but no, they're really, really good. So yeah, they're on Instagram and Twitter and everything, and we will link them below. But if you work in the industry and you need help, please reach out to them. They're very, very good.
Do they provide mental health support, or do they pay for it?
It is in regards to mental health support. So when someone cannot work for let's to be general, a nervous breakdown, let's say, and can't work for that, I think they will then put you in touch with professionals, and I don't know this specifically, I think then the charity will help you out with when you're not getting paid because of said problems and things like that. So yes, but again, all their stuff will be linked below, and obviously it tells you everything on their website anyway, but they're very, very good. So, today, or carrying on from our last conversation, we wanted to go into OCD, which I thought would be the best place to start, again, just because it's something I understand, I know, I've had for a good while now, or I've had all my life, if you want to refer to our previous conversation, if I've got a predisposition to it or something like that. So yeah, I mean, obviously, as you know, I've got a load of questions here for you. I don't know if you want to go straight into that or kind of into where it started specifically with me. I mean, again, I'm basing my experience on a phobia, which is emetophobia, which is a fear of being sick, which then incorporated itself into OCD. So trying to control myself from any eventuality of me being sick. And that's been going on for a very good while now. So yeah, I mean, obviously we spoke previously about the the genetic dispositions to these types of things. That doesn't have to just be OCD. That can be depression, bipolar, all these various different things. But I thought, after we've now spoken about that, in terms of phobias, as you said before, if someone's predisposed to a phobia, whether it's fear of spiders, whatever it is, mine's being sick, so physically being ill, which is something, again, my father has. He's we could say a hypochondriac, and I've kind of seen that throughout my life. He's rather dramatic as well. My first question was, how does that then link to OCD? Why does it link to OCD? Because I now know that there were certain things I would do when I was young. If I was scared of something, I would, not go to a specific place or not do this or that. So does everyone with a phobia have OCD or OCD-like symptoms, and why are they kind of directly linked?
Oh, and there's a couple of different questions.
Yeah, sorry, I've kind of put them in there.
I'll start with the first one. Well, in a sense, you've just laid out the history, isn't there? So for most mental health difficulties, there tends to be a genetic predisposition. A genetic predisposition to develop a condition simply means that there's a multitude of genes that, given the right, or you could say the wrong circumstances at critical stages of brain development, will make it more likely that you develop a condition. So, bearing that in mind, it seems that in your family history, there is that genetic load, yeah? So that was just passed on to you through no fault of your own. It was just there. It still didn't mean that you were going to develop either emetophobia or OCD, who, by the way, are two different conditions. So emetophobia is very much a phobia and tends to have a history, a story that helps us understand how certain beliefs have developed into irrational fears and then lead to a phobia being present. OCD is an anxiety-based disorder, but it differs from emetophobia in that you can have OCD without the phobia, and vice versa. You can have a phobia without displaying OCD. Yeah, so they're separate. However, having said that, because one of the main themes of OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder, is linked to a fear of contamination, this is where you have an overlap. Yeah, in your
that's the typical theme.
That's the overlap. You could say it may have started. Well, it starts with the genetic load. Then you have a history. You just alluded to it. You grew up with a father who displayed overtly his anxiety to becoming sick. Yeah. And this has rubbed off on you. That's a nurturing factor that has increased the likelihood of you responding in a similar fashion. And that's irrespective of whether there is a genetic load or not. As a child, you're exposed to archetypes, to responses to emotion, responses to crisis, responses to risk, and so on and so on. And that just, it rubs off on the child, and the child incorporates these reactions and beliefs. Yeah? So now we have distinguished emetophobia, which is a fear of vomiting, which in your case is the story of a, let's say, 11-year-old boy who became very sick on one particular evening. And because not just you were sick, but also your caregivers, mainly your mum, that would have otherwise given you the reassurance whilst you were going through that episode of repeated vomiting, she couldn't quite be there for you. She couldn't quite reassure you and make you feel safe and contained. That seemingly has exacerbated the fear of becoming ill again, in a lifetime. And so starting from this experience onwards, you have then developed some OCD
coping mechanisms.
Yeah? So the fear has then become, and it makes sense, that emetophobia tends to come, hand in hand with some OCD traits pertaining to contamination fears. So, because in your mind it goes, I need to make sure I'm not at risk of being contaminated by a virus or a bacteria, which may render me, unwell and make me, sick. And this has kind of spiraled, you could not out of control, but has kind of grown over time due to the mechanisms that you spoke to, and that is mainly avoidance. So it's an anxiety-based disorder. Phobia, just the same. Anxiety is at the root of that. And anxiety will lead to avoidance of the thing that makes you scared. And this is what you said, is I would avoid going to that place. I would avoid certain types of food. And the other thing that happens is reassurance. So you want to minimize your distress by getting reassurance, which oftentimes involves including others into making you feel safer, or it could also be that you go onto Google and do lots of research and so on.
Yeah, that's the dangerous one.
Yeah, but in your case, but then it is important to note that anxiety very much is like a plant. Yeah, so a plant needs nutrients, sunlight, and water to grow. If you expose it to sunlight regularly, you water it, and you give it some nutrients from time to time, it will just grow. That's what the plant does. Anxiety is just the same. Every time you avoid the thing that makes you scared, every time you seek reassurance to temper the distress that you feel, you are basically exposing the plant of anxiety to sunlight and water, and it grows. Yeah, I think
So
that was
it builds over time.
It builds over time. Yeah,
I think
it tends to.
One of the more interesting things when I've obviously started going to therapy, which was when I started therapy at the right time, because it was I had never experienced, or what I thought experienced anything, which actually I had, like it. And it was very confusing at the time because, I was a pretty boyish boy doing normal boy things, and then suddenly, overnight, I was essentially a different person. And it's, of course, the stress and the worry, but the routines, which is what you mentioned before, are what have really interested me because they've essentially changed over time. And I remember when I spoke to, I think it was some therapist I saw a while ago, I think it was when I started. So essentially I've had, over time, different routines that I've engaged in. And I'm sure other people who have got OCD have got different routines to that. But a typical one would be hand washing, especially with a phobia where it's based on illness. That wasn't my first one. My first one was food. It was not eating, meats or, any food that had any risk, or over-checking things or whatever it is, or making sure something's cooked through. But the hand washing didn't come until way later. So essentially it was foods to start with, then not going to, specific restaurants because of that. And then it was not going out at all and seeing people. And then COVID hit. And COVID, that mantra of, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands, I just started doing it. Before then, I'd wash my hands, but never really, if I tied my shoelaces, I wouldn't wash my hands. If I touched a dog, I wouldn't wash my hands. Things most people do. And then suddenly, I remember, COVID hit and Mum was buying hand wash and stuff just for the household because that's what you were told to do. And a month down the line, she went, "Are you drinking this hand wash? How much are you using? Like, why is it going so fast?" And then it just snowballed over time. I mean, I've got a photo that I can, post on whatever social media, and it is a line of like 30 bottles of hand wash. My sink just covered in soap all over the floor, everywhere. And it so quickly snowballed out of control. And that was like the worst one. And then in between that, you've got the very kind of random things of, numbers and lining things up, and which I still have to catch myself out when I do. When I get out the shower and I've got the towel on the floor, I have to line it up perfectly, and I do it 5 times, and I tap this 5 times. So, I mean, I think first of all, my first question, so you can answer this one and then we'll link to my next, is why do those routines change over time?
Due to a multitude of factors. That may get boring as the podcast progresses, but it is also one of the fundamentals of therapy or being psychologically minded is that you very rarely have A causes B. Yeah, it's more you have the whole alphabet to choose from, and to various degrees. All the letters will have more or less importance or weight in obviously a certain difficulty emerging, or mental health presentation emerging. So why does it change? It can change because there's a change in the context. And you just
I kind of just laid it out, actually, just after you said that, yeah.
For you, a dramatic change in context was COVID, the whole pandemic, the heightened, not just individual, but societal fear, and there's social contagion of that. You may have heard of mass hysteria. So that is the context. So you can have a change of context, which means that you may leave a certain compulsion behind altogether and develop new ones. Yeah. Equally, say you could start a relationship with someone, and that's a significant change in your context, and the worries may be different. Yeah. Or you can start a new job. So a change in context. On the other side, engaging in therapy can also lead to, while you extinguish, through a therapeutic approach, you extinguish a certain obsession or you extinguish a certain compulsion, which creates bandwidth to come up with a new one. Yeah.
See, it always feels like, what's the whack-a-mole?
Yeah, the whack-a-mole.
Like, one pops up, you kind of just on a good day get it down,
yeah,
and then it pops up again.
Okay.
And then if it's a bad day, you can't,
yeah,
and then more pop up.
yeah,
So with me specifically, if it's something I'm, even coming into London, it's a 20-minute train. If I know I'm coming into London and there's a risk I'm not at home and I could be ill when I'm not at home, I'm doing about 4 more different routines that in a normal day I could sometimes I'll do them, but other days I can go, you know what, I don't need to do that. I've got nothing on tomorrow, it's fine. It's almost that, it's like a relief. I don't have to worry about that. But even, coming in here today, we're in London, and last night was just did a few more checks on certain different things. Did, various, just different routines. But I know I did kind of answer that question myself, is they change over time due to specific things.
Yeah, but there's more. So we've spoken about the possibility of positive or of progress through therapeutic means, change of context, but sleep is a massive factor. So if your sleep is disrupted, then you will have a knock-on effect. You will have a baseline of anxiety which is higher. You have less tolerance to triggers. On the end of that, you see an emergence or increase of compulsions or OCD type behavior, alcohol intake, substances, including caffeine intake, all of that.
That's a noticeable one. If I have more than 2 coffees in a day, if I go to 3 coffees, which I rarely ever do, there's a noticeable, I feel jittery.
Yeah. And that, okay, so what you then do is your sympathetic nervous system has been activated, and you'll pick up on that jitteriness, which to you sends a signal to your brain that
something's wrong,
and then it just increases your anxiety. You get into your mind, you're mulling over scenarios, possible outcomes, and on, and it's a vicious circle. Yeah, so it can start with thoughts. Usually for OCD, is trigger or simply intrusive thoughts. So there can be a trigger, there doesn't need to be a trigger. So for example, you can read something about illness in the papers, that's a trigger. That will then lead to certain thoughts of an intrusive nature. But the trigger doesn't need to be there per se.
Can I tell you, I had one this morning?
Yeah.
That I thought I shut down quite well.
Uh-huh.
So as we were talking about before we started filming, I'm planning to go to LA for work stuff. And I woke up this morning with a slight pain down lower bit of my stomach. And obviously going to LA, booking flights, has been on my mind. So I've been thinking about it. So I woke up and I felt this pain. I went, oh shit, what if my appendix goes? And then my first thing was, what if I'm in America when my appendix blows? And then my next thing was, where's the closest hospital? And then I looked at where I'm staying, or planning on staying, and saw where the hospital is and went, oh, it's literally around the corner. Okay, that's fine. And then eventually I literally sat there and went, I've just created a whole, for no reason, for absolutely no reason, I've created a whole scenario in my head, obsessed about it for a few minutes. But I was quite impressed that I was actually able to pick up on it, because sometimes I will just keep going, like it just goes and goes and goes and goes. And I've like visualized, I've seen myself throw up in America, like when I go over there. And it's those, it just goes as quick, and if you let it run, it just goes as quick as it can. Which is it's hard to deal with. I probably sound nuts saying that.
No, so to begin with, let me be very clear. So when you go to therapy, there's a couple of basic things that ought to happen. And one is normalization, and then externalization. Normalization is letting you know from a genuine, standpoint, and you can get numbers if that helps, that you're not nuts, because that's exactly what people think about themselves when they feel they're in need of therapeutic support, is I'm weak, I'm dysfunctional, not good enough, I'm unlovable, whatever. And you need to help the clients move away from this very individual, isolated experience of something which is very common. So I'll stay with OCD. An intrusive thought is usually what it starts off with. An intrusive thought means that it's a thought which is unwanted, it's distressing, and it can be of a violent or sexual nature, as well. But these are key components.
Like just negative, just...
Yeah, because we have all sorts of thoughts, up to, on average, 4,000 thoughts a day. Some thoughts you may pick up on, most of the thoughts you're unaware of, consciously unaware of, but they will direct your emotional state, because it's not because consciously you're not aware of the thought that it doesn't have an impact on you. But an intrusive thought you'll be consciously aware of. You'll know that you're having the thought, and you'll hold on to it, and you'll derive some meaning from it. Oh my God, I just had this thought which, let's say, is morally not okay to have.
I murdered someone, or...
So, the categories of OCD is hygiene, or illness or contamination, is harm to self or others, is symmetry, and then moral questions.
So that was a very loud helicopter flying overhead there.
Pass. So moral questions, and these have a variety of themes. As I said, to do with violent kind of visions, or thoughts of a sexual nature. Also, intrusive thoughts is not just thoughts. Is, as you just said, I've imagined myself vomiting in the States. Well, it's a vision. That is also an intrusive thought. It's unwanted images, as well as unwanted thoughts that have an impact on your day-to-day life. It's not just, I have, all of us have thoughts. So normalization is letting you know that equally I have visions that are disturbing, equally I experience unwanted thoughts. Anyone.
Can I butt in?
Yeah.
Just when you were saying that, just because I think it links to the OCD, and this is something that I've been told off for before, after I'd said I'd visualised myself throwing up in America, something went off in my head, like it just clicked and said, I shouldn't have said that because that could be jinxing it. And touching wood and all those different things. Is that another form of OCD? So again, have I just by me thinking that could be bad luck in essence, is that a form of OCD?
Okay, so your obsession is about is about not becoming ill, and then compulsions. So I said earlier on, anxiety, avoidance, and reassurance. For OCD, it's compulsions. So you have an intrusive thought. It fills you with dread, and you then come up with a compulsion, which is an action which can be overt, can be physical. So it can be tapping, it can be turning around your own axis 3 times, it can be all sorts of stuff, it can be checking, or it could be internal. It could be something that no one looking at you
Could
would
tell that
notice,
you're,
but internally you're doing all sorts of rituals. The whole point of why you do the compulsion is because you want to alleviate the emotional distress you feel. Yeah. So the obsession and the intrusive thoughts causes you to feel really distressed and anxious, and then you, as you said, oh, what if, and then you engage in, touching wood or whatnot. That will alleviate your anxiety temporarily. Yeah. But going back to the analogy of the plant, every time you give in to a compulsion, you're watering your plant of anxiety, you're exposing it to sunlight, and it grows.
You just mentioned the exposure, and this is something I don't like it, but I know it works. And I've kind of got 2 questions that I missed originally. I mean, first of all, I can kind of answer this because my question was, does going towards the fear really help? Kind of the importance of short-term pain for long-term gain. And I've personally experienced that. Part of the reason I'm going to America is for that exact reason, because it's going to push me out. It's literal exposure therapy of me leaving the comfort of home and my surroundings to go push myself also for work. But then my kind of next question, in terms of someone who can't access therapy, I think it's very difficult to then go and do exposure therapy, to try and push themselves to do so. Is there anything else that someone with OCD, or are you only going to say that's the only thing you can do? If someone can't access therapy and they have symptoms of OCD, usually, as someone, just if someone asks me, if they were to ask me, I'm not a professional here, I would say, you need to start meditating, because I genuinely notice a difference. And then, you've got to get yourself out more and this and that. Is there anything else you would recommend? If it's someone by themselves, they live by themselves, just them, they've got no one else to kind of either indulge it or not, what could they be doing?
Do you want me to answer the last question or the first question first?
Answer the last question about exposure therapy.
Okay. Well, that's the first question.
Sorry, first question.
All right. Okay, so the first question, exposure therapy, and the effectiveness of that?
I mean, how well do you think it works? Because, I think I know what your answer is, but...
When it comes to OCD,
yeah,
in particular, it's the golden standard. So, addressing anxiety, you have third wave CBT, meaning...
Third wave?
Well, it's, you had CBT, then you had the second version of it, then you have the third version of it, which includes, incorporating mindfulness into it.
Right, okay.
And acceptance and commitment therapy. So there's that aspect that comes before CBT. Okay, so I'll explain CBT first, briefly. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is something that, especially in the UK, perhaps less so in France and other kind of mainland Europe countries, is being used. But in the UK and in the States, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is usually the first kind of go-to in terms of addressing anxiety or most mental health difficulties. It consists of, as you said, becoming aware of your cognitions, understanding what triggers them, understand the context as to why this has become important or what vulnerabilities there are. So that can be genetic predisposition, that can be nurturing factors, such as your story. And then looking at, okay, so when I'm triggered, I tend to have these types of thoughts. When I have these types of thoughts, it makes me feel, say, sad or anxious. When I feel sad or anxious, I tend to binge eat. I tend to hide away from friends and family. I tend to go on my phone and scroll social media mindlessly for hours on end. I tend to, and so on and so on. And that's what CBT is about, etching out a structure that helps you understand how basically you function. All of us are very apt at knowing how we feel. Not all of us are very apt at verbalizing. So if you're neurodivergent, you can feel all sorts of stuff, but it can be more difficult to put a word on it, saying, "Oh, I am feeling angry or anxious or this." But most of us tend to be apt at saying, "Okay, I'm sad, I'm downhearted, or I'm anxious." But we're not very clued up as to knowing how we tend to then act when we feel these certain emotions.
Or react to certain things.
Oh yeah, react. And also we're not very clued up at knowing how we have been thinking and how that emotion just maintains or exacerbates a certain way of thinking, which keeps us trapped. So that's CBT. CBT used to be very much, where are you now? Let's just write out that pattern. Then third wave CBT now is also including mindfulness, which is being able to observe your mind doing its thing, which is basically non-stop producing thoughts, most of which are utter rubbish, but at least you notice it happening. You understand that you have no authority over that. It will do what it will do. The best thing you can do is just observe it. Don't judge yourself for whatever's going on in your mind, and bring yourself back to where you want to focus. Yeah, and then you have acceptance, acceptance, which is, well, I first need to accept how I feel, rather than fighting and saying I shouldn't be feeling like this because, and that's a common story, I have a house, I have a job, I have a lovely husband or a lovely wife or a lovely partner, I don't deserve to be feeling depressed, for example. So you need, compassion towards yourself, you need acceptance of, well, it is what it is, and rather than fighting it. So then CBT. And so part of CBT is this exposure and response prevention, which is a gold standard for OCD, which basically aims at willfully exposing yourself to the things that scare you until you desensitize yourself to the trigger. You learn to tolerate the distress that comes with it. You do that in a stepped approach. So you start with a very small upset, and then you work your way up to the biggest upset, and then you try and break the cycle that you have developed over time, which is obsession compulsion cycle, or the actions that you do. You try and break that cycle. You try and break the habituation that has installed in a negative way. You try to replace it with a more positive habituation, so you become at ease or more at ease with all these emotions that come up when you're in a distressing situation.
So, for example, I, a few years ago, would not get on the train to come into London. I had to drive. And then, for whatever reason, one day I couldn't drive and decided to get the train. And then the next time I also got the train, and then I got the train again. And I used to get the train loads when I was younger, but for some reason I'd stopped doing it. Well, for some reason, I know the exact reason why I stopped doing it. And then I got very used to it. And even recently, a few weeks ago, hadn't been out in a while, hadn't really done much, just mainly just being at home, and then had to go into London for a meeting. And 2 days before, I was going, oh, fuck. I was really starting to think about it. And then on the day, I was going, maybe I just won't get the train, maybe I'll drive. And I gave into it, and I drove. But then since then, I've been into London over the past kind of week quite a lot. And I've got the train every time, and I'm really comfortable doing it again. So it's not that I'm scared of trains, or it's my fear of getting ill while, on public transport or anything like that. But I think that's quite a good example of how exposure therapy, because you can quite easily go back into a normal sense, a normal kind of routine. And then you kind of get stuck in that. So you have to just keep on, movement is the key, I'd say anyway. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, well, 100%. Focus on the process much more than than the outcome.
But I do just myself, and that's why I asked the question, about for someone who can't access therapy, because I don't think if I had therapists, I don't quite know what I'd do to expose myself to things, because I wouldn't do it willingly. Now, after a very long time, I, can, but as we said before, some days there are bad days, and there are good days for whatever reason. That is good sleep, bad diet, all those different things. And some days I can battle against it and go, right, I can do this, this, and this, and I break down loads, and then they'll be fine for a week. For example, mouthwash. I got into the routine of using mouthwash after a shower because I was worried that it was going to somehow make me ill. For a few weeks, I got into that routine again after breaking it, and then I threw away my mouthwash after I showered, so I couldn't use it. And then I slowly but surely got into the routine, so I'm just about there again, of not using mouthwash. But it's a constant routine of, if you give it what's the phrase? If you give it an inch, it will take a mile or something. And that's kind of what it is. As soon as you feed that OCD plant, as you call it, it seems to just shoot really quickly, and it will gather up as much as it can and go back into those routines, which is very difficult.
It is, and ideally you go to your therapist, you explore your history so that you can start making sense of why you're in the situation that you are. You normalize it, you really get to grips with, it's not just me, it's, millions of other people. Now your story is your own, and everyone, is unique and will experience, say, OCD in their unique way, but you normalize it, you externalize it, it's not you, so you kind of break up this alignment between my whole self and the OCD. You're Sam, multifaceted, individual, and part of this overall kind of puzzle is, a problem, which you really externalize, you name it. I like the fact that you said the monster, because that's how you, in therapy tend to refer to, maybe more with teenagers, but you say, the monster of OCD, but it works with others, just the same.
Well, it just seems so kind of great. I mean, just what you're saying there brought up another thing, which was, recently, you kind of recognize people through what they do or who they are and how they do things. And recently, I've noticed that friends who I've known for a very long time, who've known me through, different eras of my life type of thing, now very much think and speak of me as Sam with OCD. Yeah, okay. Like it's not just Sam. And I completely get that, because I would be the same. It's like someone who's obsessed with football. You correlate them with football or boxing, whatever it is. And, there's a running joke, I've got gloves with me, or whatever it is. Which I'm not saying that affects me in any way, I don't care, but I have noticed that it's almost like a part of my personality now, because it's been going on for quite a while. Which I'm sure can be broken very easily. I mean, look, when I go to LA and hopefully meet people there, they won't know anything about it. And I'm going to I did think about this, I'm going to consciously not bring it up, because I will say when I first meet people, oh, by the way, sorry, my hands are a bit red, I've got really bad OCD. And I'm not even going to acknowledge it. If someone sees me do something, because I don't really care if someone sees me washing my hands too much, or if someone sees me with gloves, that doesn't bother me. I have no kind of shame about it at all. I don't really try and hide it. But
it's important to say is very unique.
One
of the thresholds for people to come to therapy is because there's shame. And so I wanted to say, it's commendable that you speak so freely about your experience, because I am sure that it will resonate with a lot of people, and I hope that it will help them to, take that first step or continue with whatever they've been trying to do in order to help themselves. It's not a given. I mean, you say, I have no shame. but OCD especially, there's a strong component of shame that makes it difficult to be broached with family members, loved ones, friends. So
I'm probably very lucky in that sense that
Yeah.
it doesn't. I mean, I think probably having quite eccentric parents, it just plays into it that it's kind of like it doesn't. I don't obviously, of course, I care what people think of me, but I don't. If they don't like me for that reason, and I also find it funny. My life is kind of based on humour. I try to find a laugh in most things. So I don't, and I think it would be good for most people. But then there's also, I saw on Joe Rogan the other day, I know we're going off on a tangent here, she's just written a book, I think she's a psychologist, I don't know if you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think I
And
do.
she'd said that, the more you talk about things, the more you reference it, it almost reinforces it, it builds it, whether that's true or not in my case or in other people's cases, I don't know, but it seems like it could be something if you're always talking about it. I probably think if I was more shameful of my OCD, it might not be as bad in a sense, because I would not be so open to just stand there and wash my hands. I mean, of course, if I'm in, if we get the train into Marylebone Station or whatever, and I'm stood there washing my hands, I'm conscious people looking at me, if I'm stood there for a while, I'm conscious people going, he's probably like, what is he doing? But I'm like, oh, I don't care. It doesn't, but I'm sure if I had more shame, it could even be better. So I don't know if it's a positive or a negative.
Well, so my answer will always be it's never entirely negative and it's never entirely positive. Maybe at one given moment you could say, well, this is clearly negative, but who's to say how this is going to play out on on a longer scale? If you allow for life to unfold, maybe what was your darkest of times can propel you to become, if you overcome that challenge, the person that you'll be later on in life. It could be short thereafter, it could be years to come, but again, nothing is entirely negative or entirely positive in the moment. There tends to be a silver lining even to one's most difficult moments in life, but that's obviously difficult to connect with in the moment. To discuss this lady, I've seen a very short clip of that.
Do you know the clip I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. Yes, of course. If you keep on talking about the same subject over and over again without challenging it, it becomes your narrative. That's what we do. We create narratives of who we are and of our lives based on a few memories, which to begin with aren't always accurate. You see that in families where one individual amongst siblings has this narrative that parents were abusive and never there, and the 3 or 4 other siblings go like, what are you on about? Dad was always there, mom was always there. Yes, okay, there may have been occasional shouting, but
they have their abused, own narrative.
So and again, it's not about true or false, it's just memories may not always be accurate, and it's what we do. Like imagine your life being displayed in dots of a second, against a wall, and every day is a vertical, it's a column. It's impossible to remember every single dot of your life until the point that you are now at. So what you tend to do is
generalize.
What kids do is you take a marker and you go, right, I'm going to take this event on that day, then I'm going to skip a few years or a few months, and I'm going to take that event, and I'm going to skip a few days or even a decade, and then. But we have a tendency we can have a tendency to latch on the negatives, and you then completely dismiss all the other thousands of dots on the wall. But because you can only hold on to, a finite number of dots to create your narrative, that becomes your story. I am this poor person for whom, nothing's worked out, life's against me, people don't like me, okay, that can be, really detrimental if you hold on to that narrative, and if you keep on repeating it, 100% it's going to get worse, because that's what people do.
It's like a mantra.
In their minds. Yeah, there's a rumination going back in the past. So as a therapist, what you do is you need to give space to the person to be heard, and you need to validate them. It doesn't mean, just going along with the story, but it does mean saying, hey, I recognize that it's pretty hard for you to feel the way you do. Yeah. And that's what it starts off with. You do need to listen and just absorb, this narrative. And then over time, you can gently start to challenge the narrative of the person and say, hey, what about instead of holding on to this dot of that day, for example, say the day your grandfather passed away, instead of holding on to the pain and the grief, could you, is it feasible for you to hold on to the other things that also happened on that day, which is you had a warm embrace from, someone you hadn't seen for a long time, and people.
It's like finding a positive
because
memory.
It's not. It doesn't need to be one or the other. You can have a bad event, which is true and has had its impact on you, sitting alongside more positive events, which are equally factually true. So you can basically re-author the narrative of your life. So I don't completely agree with this statement that, repeat. Well, I would say I would agree that just repeating, but that's not what therapy is about, or shouldn't be about. You listen, you validate, you create a rationale, you create rapport,
slowly start,
and then you challenge. Yeah, and so with CBT, it's cognitive restructuring, for example, where you challenge certain irrational beliefs and you replace them with more rational and factual beliefs, or you can challenge how certain emotions impact you. Rather than working on the emotion itself, you work on the relationship between the emotion or the thought, and so on and so on. I mean, it's endless what you can do, but yeah, it should never be just listening to someone rehash the same old story without.
Because that's never going to change anything.
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I hope it doesn't, but it may be that it does happen.
I'm conscious because it's 2 to 4.
It's suitable. Well, briefly, I'll try and be briefly and do it bullet points. Liz, you asked me a question which I'm keen to answer. What can people do if they don't have the means to seek out private therapy or they're on the waiting list? Well, there's self-help resources which come in the form of books and apps and websites. And for OCD, there's the OCD Foundation. There's certain OCD-specific apps. So there's a multitude of good resources available.
And anything else we can put below as well, we'll make sure that it's linked.
All right. Okay. So you've got these self-help resources. Then you can engage in mindfulness, which is, very helpful. Again, there are plenty of good apps. Personally, I would recommend Waking Up by Sam Harris. It is my own opinion. I use the app, but I think that currently it is the best app available. I do prefer it above the other apps like Calm or Headspace. You make sure again that your lifestyle is helping you or to your benefit. So good sleep, healthy diet. I'm not talking about salads, and it's about respecting the rhythm that you have. You have a circadian. I think that's how you pronounce it. You have a day, a rhythm throughout the day.
Yeah.
And
circadian rhythm.
Well, that will be how you pronounce it. You need to respect that. Yeah. So if you play games, even socially through the night, and then sleep till 3 p.m., you're off to a bad start. Yeah?
I mean, just really, I know we're kind of brushing through now. But
No, I'll continue. You can do ERP, so exposure and response prevention, even without the support. You make a list of the stuff that scares you, and you do the simple ones. Yeah. Incrementally, exactly. Then you spoke of, I'm quite open with my friends. That, as you said, can be a negative because maybe it allows you to keep on engaging or indulging your compulsions. On the other hand, I would say it's a great resource for you because ideally, you don't go through difficulties by yourself, you engage a supportive network. Now, if your parents and your friends are aware of your OCD and are being taught how to respond in a way which is helpful to counteract your OCD, then you already have self-help resources, ERP you can do by yourself, mindfulness you can do, some kind of network support to fall back on.
I feel like a lot of people's friends and families don't have that though.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I mean, unless it's, them taking the initiative to read up on it.
Yeah.
I mean, my friends still don't. They kind of get it, they kind of don't.
Yeah.
Family is the same.
Yeah.
My mum's very good, but then she also gives into a lot of stuff if I'm asking her things. My dad, kind of over his head, doesn't get it. He's apparently old school, if you want to call it. So
that's an issue.
Yeah,
And
that's
the
the difficult thing.
So that would be called a maintaining factor, which may not cause but will maintain the OCD to continue. And so if you go to an inpatient setting, I know of one at the Maudsley, South London, that work with children. They inevitably include the family into the treatment. You need that environment to come together and to know how to refer to the OCD and how to be there in a way that is helpful rather than offering reassurance, which is a default position of most people who care for a loved one will have a tendency to oblige to the distress by offering reassurance. Again, reassurance, you water and you expose the plant to sunlight.
I feel like we've covered OCD pretty well.
I hope so.
I think eventually we will do another episode and probably go into more specific things and how you can deal with it. And this is with every episode as well, I think. We're going to kind of build on each.
All right.
Well, that was my idea at least anyway. Sure. So you need to get off. And thank you for listening to The Waiting List. Peace.
All right, pleasure.